You have not heard a proper Canadian accent until you've been to the prairies. Personally, I don't think that I have it, except in rare moments of road rage, I go completely, "Hey bud, give her a second, would ya?" Oh god. "Hey, give her a second, bud, would ya?" CBC did a survey a couple years ago with over 9,500 participants, only those residing in the region that they grew up in, and found a surprising but obvious difference in both pronunciation and vocabulary provincially within Canada. So today we will be defining and explaining some prairie slang. And for the most part, it seems our slang is pretty random, but it also kind of falls under 3 different categories that I've lumped off as having to do with the cold, because if you know one thing about Saskatchewan, it's probably how cold our winters are. This year, it was actually colder than Mars at one point. What? Drinking, or alcohol, and kind of like farming, which makes sense because agriculture is huge in Saskatchewan. I want to start with one that's doesn't really fall under any of those, and that's rider pride. So this is a term coined to celebrate our football team, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So if you like show out for the team, you go to a game, then you've got rider pride. If you see someone with a watermelon on their head, do not be alarmed. This is a typical look for somebody with rider pride. And the riders are regarded as like low-key celebrities in Saskatchewan, so when I came here and people didn't know who they were, I was genuinely surprised. Even I can remember in elementary school, we had a Rough Rider come visit, and me, knowing nothing of football, caring not at all about football, still was like shaking, like bringing my sneaker for this Rough Rider to sign, and I wore it like with pride, with rider pride. Wheeling is another good one because it got some cross-province spread. I've definitely heard this one outside of Saskatchewan, but supposedly that's where it got its start. And wheeling is when you have a mutual crush, but it's not quite dating. This was super popular my freshman year of high school. So it'd be like, "Oh my god, do you have wheels? Like, OMG, do you have wheels? Are you and so wheeling?" And I mean, it did become regarded as cringy quite quickly, but it was still like regarded as a legitimate dating status, like you are wheeling. So now thinking of the cold and all the slang words we have to do with the cold, I'll do a couple. For starters, get your gotch. It's like all of the vowels, get your gotch. Yeah. So get your gotch means underwear. This one was used a lot in my household, like actually to the point where when somebody called like underwear panties, I was like so uncomfortable. I just hated it for some reason. I thought this was just kind of a random like hickey thing, but apparently it's because in the really cold winter, obviously you're wearing lots of layers, and so underwear was too broad of a term because that could be anything from the sweater under your parka to the long johns under your jeans. So they coined this word that meant specifically like your underwear. Speaking of cold, if you've ever been in a slough or a swamp or properly deep snow, none of this baby Toronto stuff, or even just in a big old puddle and you've had your boot fill, or in worst case scenarios, fully fall off, we call that a booter. So getting a booter, I remember being really little, I would actually like go into really big puddles or like a swamp and intentionally try to get my boot filled. I don't know. Another word that gets its origin from just us being cold is bunny hug, which is also probably the most famous word out of Saskatchewan, just because it's so odd. And a bunny hug is a hoodie, what you'd usually call a hoodie, and there's lots of theories surrounding where this comes from, but one of them is that there's a similar garment that looks like a bunny hug that's made out of bunny fur that was invented in the 16th century, but then a couple hundred years later it resurfaced in Saskatchewan just because it was so useful in our cold winters. And then the name bunny hug itself comes from a dance move, actually. Not to be confused with the bunny hop, the bunny hug is a little bit more promiscuous, that involves hip holding and grinding that was popular in the early 1900s. And your hands sit on your dance partner's waist, right about where the pouch of a bunny hug sits. Moving on to the drinking, probably one of the most popular ones is pull. And to pull for someone is to buy an underage person alcohol or to be their pull. This one always seems to be a fun conversation starter because I found province to province, they have a different word for this. So for example, in Alberta, it's boot, to boot for someone or to be someone's boot. And I've been told in Ontario, it's grab. So this one kind of has to do with alcohol and with farming, I guess. It's a holiday that's not really regarded as a holiday to anybody else. It's a holiday that the rest of Canada, I don't think, anticipates quite as highly as Saskatchewan, and that is May Long, which is the Victoria Day long weekend. We just call it May Long, and it's highly anticipated because for families, it's usually the first trip up to the lake for the season. For farmers and gardeners, it's when the planting season begins again. And then for the young people, it's a 3-day bender or a 3-day ongoing party, if you will. Speaking of drinking, have you heard of a game called beer darts? I don't want to associate this with everyone in Saskatchewan because I'm sure there's lots of mainly responsible adults who do not play this game, but this was a game that I was introduced to as a teenager. Pretty much you arrange your lawn chairs into a circle and each person sits with their feet planted with a beer between their feet, and you shake it out first so that it's nice and like dense with air, and then you try to pierce the beer across from you with a dart, or not necessarily right across from you, but somewhere across from you. And if you pierce it, then they have to shotgun the beer, which is to like drink the beer in one go from the dart hole. And I may or may not have pierced someone's leg and will never be playing this game again. Another one that kind of has to do with farming, or I guess fishing in this case, is that it's very common to refer to walleye fish as pickerels. Like, I caught a pickerel, like you just call it a pickerel, even though walleyes and pickerels are completely different types of fish. And no one's really sure why or when this misnaming began. And I guess scientists and fishers are actually like really pushing to correct it because it's wrong. But you'll still find like in stores, in some diners and stuff, they still sell it as pickerel, even though it's really walleye. So that's weird. And then there's some things we say that just have to do with the brand of things that we use. So I guess, I'd never heard this one personally. I guess in Saskatchewan, often people call chocolate milk Vico. And that's just because Vico's a brand of chocolate milk that was really popular. Spits are typically what we call sunflower seeds because it's a brand of sunflower seeds that everyone eats, like at a soccer game, or I remember my dad spitting them at I remember my dad bringing a big bag of spits to like my soccer games. That's what spits are, if you ever hear that. A pill is like a Pilsner, BL, Bud Light, Blapple, Bud Light Apple, more drinking related ones. Dainties are like something your grandma might make. They're like little cookies, little pastries and stuff. Those were some prairie slang words. I hope you had fun learning them with me. Obviously not everyone in Saskatchewan says any or all of these, but these are definitely ones I grew up with. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you say Saskatchewan or Saskatchewan. Alright, so I'm a header. Leave a like if you would, eh? Alright.